Hello, welcome to Liquid Swan's channel. I'm your host, Liquid Swan, and I'm here to interview Nathan Hood today. Hey Nathan, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. It's great to be here. How are you doing yourself?
Oh, it's a little bit chilly here, but it's okay. I got my mountain water beside me and my cat's on my lap, and I'm ready to get into it.
It sounds a little bit similar, and we in the UK. I'm in kind of the north of England, and it's a little bit chilly. It's a little bit grey, but there's the first signs of spring are finally here. There's a few flowers trying to break out, so everybody's not quite sure whether they should be wearing lots of woolly jumpers still or get into our summer gear. The transition's never easy for us
Yeah,
over here. So yeah, it sounds quite similar at the moment.
well, where I live, it's sort of they style themselves as a British city or English city.
Oh,
We
okay.
got like London buses and stuff like that, and lots of tourists. So it's I don't want to dox myself, but it's a nice little spot. But it kind of reminds me a little bit of England when I went there um, back in 2022. Well, some areas of England, anyways. Other areas of England kind of remind me of downtown Toronto and the Anyman city.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. It depends where you go. Um,
yeah, true.
of course.
Well, without doxing yourself, of course. What's your background? Siblings, parents, like family life? What are the origins of Nathan Hood?
So my parents are both from Scotland.
Oh, okay.
One from the East Coast and one from the West Coast or the Glasgow area. And I was actually born in Scotland, in a small town called Paisley, which is close to Glasgow.
Oh, that's where my,
Um,
my, my great
it,
grandfather was from there.
oh, really? Oh,
Yeah,
that's
he
amazing.
was born in
We could be
Paisley.
related.
Yeah, maybe.
Distant relations.
Yeah.
And well, you might know it's actually quite an old town. It has a medieval abbey right in the heart of it, and which is still active. There's still services that go on there today. And when I was about 5 months old, we moved to England. My father was doing a degree in a southern university,
Hmm.
and so I grew up in there for a few years, and then my sister was born at that point. I have one sibling, and then we moved to Birmingham, which
Oh,
is in the middle of the country.
yeah.
But one of the interesting things about Birmingham, because it's got quite a reputation as being this kind of concrete jungle, very multicultural, and so on. But it its suburbs are quite extensive. I mean, it's the second biggest city after London.
Hmm.
So there's certain areas in it which are absolutely beautiful and lovely. There's a place called Bourneville, which is
Hmm.
where the Cadbury's chocolate factory was first founded, and it's just this perfect model village. It's really beautiful in a kind of Tudor style, very influenced by the arts and crafts movement. And we lived close to there, so it was quite a nice place to grow up. And then more recently, I guess around 18, I came up to Scotland again for university, studied philosophy and theology, with always a kind of side interest in history.
Hmm.
And over the kind of next period, I went on to do a master's and a PhD in church history. And since then, I've been doing a bit of teaching and a few other things while living in the just on the border between England and Scotland now. I guess that's a natural point for me in terms of my heritage, but also where I grew up. Maybe being on the border is the closest I could get to a sense of home.
Yeah, yeah. It's,
uh,
it's it's kind of
yeah.
funny. Lines up perfectly with the narrative, anyways. Life narrative.
Definitely, and uh, the thing with where I live as well, and it's a place called Berwick upon Tweed. I don't mind sharing that.
Mm.
I think I've shared that on my channel before. Um, I mean, again, it's a really historic town. At one time, it was the second most important city in Britain after London. It was certainly the second economic powerhouse because it's right on the coast. has great shipping lines to Scandinavia and to Northern Europe, has a river which runs right into the heart of the Scotland, is
Mm.
on the road from London to Edinburgh, so it was a real centre. So there's all this history. There's a castle where Edward the First was and Robert the Bruce, but there's also just this beautiful coastline. It's absolutely stunning. It has this kind of gentle ruggedness to it. You walk 20 minutes out of the town and you're watching colonies of beautiful seabirds and so on. It's quite a magical place, I think, and uh, I'm very fortunate to live in such a place, especially when, and maybe this is the modern man in me. You're only 40 minutes on a train to the big city, so you get the benefits of city life with all the benefits of country and coastal life as well.
All that nice fresh air.
Lovely fresh air, yes,
Yeah.
yes. Although it is very windy, it even on a hot day it feels cold because the wind is like 20 to 30 miles an hour minimum around here.
I do have a question about that. Do you know, is there still a train line called the Flying Scotsman?
Yes, that train still runs.
Okay.
I think it's a steam train,
Okay.
and it does kind of special journeys. So you'd have to pay quite a lot for it. It's not like the standard train that you could get. But
Okay.
sometimes it passes through um, on the way from Edinburgh to London. Uh,
My
it,
my
it,
great grandfather and his father were engineers on that train back in the 1800s. Um,
oh
and
wow,
that sort of legend's been carried over to. I don't know how legendary it is or anything, but it's been carried in the family sort of history. So I was just kind of
that's
curious if
really
that's still running.
amazing.
Yeah.
Like, did they do that for a long time?
They did it for. I think he was quite old when he came. My great great grandfather came to Canada, and he worked for Canadian National and Canadian Pacific Railway, and they were building out the railway in Canada. So like Saskatchewan, he was really
Mm.
big there. Um, and but yeah, but that's what he was before he came. He was over there, and I think that's why they brought him over because he had like quite a bit of experience. Um,
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because that was like one of the primary trains in the UK at that time.
yeah, yeah. I think my because my grandpa, so my grandpa was obviously a son of a Scot. Um, and when he was retired, I think he married my grandma, and she's like mostly Dutch. And they were like, there's this brand of motorhome here called the Flying Dutchman. So he was always like he wanted to get one called the Flying Scotsman or whatever. But I just remember that story. Motorhome is sort of like a caravan, I guess.
Oh right, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Like what Walter White drives, right?
yeah, yeah. But nicer. Yeah,
Yeah, not a meth lab.
yeah. Not a meth lab. Well, if my grandpa was doing a meth lab, I would have been really pretty surprised. So yeah, that's very interesting. Your heritage and stuff, and um, that you came from a different place and you sort of moved and found your place, found yourself in the middle. And
Yeah, and sorry, go ahead, Liquid.
no, I was gonna ask. So your father was he was in school for similar things as you, or was he? Did he take a different route?
Yeah, so he studied theology and philosophy as
Oh,
well.
so
Uh,
similar, yeah.
and yeah, and then he's been kind of in and out of the church as well. So it was quite a natural kind of transition for him at various different points. So he taught at a theological college for a number of years while I was growing up. That's where we lived, basically, on the college campus.
Hmm.
And it was really nice. There was lovely green fields there for the kids to play in, and after school we'd all meet up and play football and hide and seek and whatever.
Hmm.
But then when I came up for university, actually, he left there and went into parish ministry again. He had done that before I was born and went back into it. So since then, he's been doing that continuously. So yeah, I think he thought that was the right time that God had called him to do that at that point. And I think the fact he stayed in one place all that time is testament to that. And it's quite different, isn't it? Because for a lot of people, certainly in like my generation, staying somewhere for 10 years in a job is probably quite unusual. It's
Yeah,
we move around so much more, whereas uh, his generation that is quite normal. So it's quite a different um, experience of modern life, I guess.
yeah. It's rare that you come across. Well, I don't know any priests with families, to be honest. But I guess there's not a lot of people that go to church here in where I live. Um,
Hmm.
so well, I know a couple priests, but they're Catholics, I suppose, and they
They're not
don't
going to
get
have
married.
extensive families then,
Yeah, true.
or they
And they usually
shouldn't.
come
They shouldn't.
and they usually come from third world countries or whatever too. Funny
Oh, so
enough.
they're migrants who have been brought into the church then.
Well, I think it's because they couldn't get anybody else. So
Yeah,
they
that's
bring them
interesting.
in.
So they're like missionaries then, missionaries to Canada.
Well, there are like established churches, but I don't know if maybe it's the Canadians that end up going into it. Maybe they go elsewhere. Uh, I'm not sure exactly why, but you get a lot of Portuguese or Brazilians. Um, Actually,
That's
my
interesting.
my town used to have like probably 2010 maybe had 20 Brazilians, and now we have like a couple thousand. Um,
But I guess as well, they might be catering to the growth in the Brazilian population as well.
yeah, that's true. Well, there used to be a lot of Portuguese here, and like big
Mm,
enough that they built their own church. They were involved in like construction, like a lot of concrete finishers and stuff are Portuguese, great workers and stuff. But they sort of have like I won't say they're segregated, but they have their own community. And then the Brazilians come in and they're like, well, we speak Portuguese too, but they're totally not the same. It's like the difference. It's the
oh
difference between Americans and the British, essentially.
yeah, yeah. Um, that's good. That's interesting though. Like they see themselves as more similar to them, but really, that I'm sure the Portuguese don't see themselves as the same at all.
Yeah, I think they're very different. Yeah. Um,
Yeah, and you kind of I think that's going to be one of the big stories of the 21st century actually in terms of religion is that so we often see in the West, Christianity is declining, right?
mhm.
Less people are going to church and so on. So the natural assumption is, oh well, that must be that's the general story of Christianity. But actually, Christianity is growing in Africa, South America, and in Asia, like
Mhm.
rapidly increasing. And so the numbers are kind of exploding in terms of Christianity. And so the center of Christianity has moved from Europe and America to the global south or the third world, however you want to call it. So if there is going to be a Christian presence in the West, it's probably going to be through these kinds of immigrant communities or missionaries converting native populations again.
Like
Maybe
back
like
to
a rehash of what happened when the church first expanded and they sent missionaries to Britain and so on. So
yeah.
it's that's going to be quite a shift. And I think it's interesting when you think about things like um, Christian nationalism. A lot of Americans on the right are advocating for kind of a strong Christian state in America.
Mhm.
Well, that's kind of interesting when you think probably in the next 30 years, most of the Christians won't be Native Americans. That's the wrong way to put it, isn't it? Native American is not the right term.
Uh,
It's
Heritage Americans.
American heritage Americans. That's what I mean. Yeah. So that's kind of interesting then, isn't it? Because it kind of it presupposes perhaps a strong immigrant community in America to uphold a Christian nationalism.
Yeah, it is weird. Like you could almost imagine it like the Northern Crusades when they were taking out the
Yeah.
pagans or conquering the pagans. It's all, I wonder if like the South, the South will do that again in some sense.
Mm.
Either through birth
It's
rates, which is probably seems to be the way, or just like forced conversions or something. I don't know.
forced conversions. I'm just imagining that, Um,
Oh, that's brutal. Uh, that's funny though.
yeah.
So I got some more questions for you, obviously. So let's get on to those. What are the origins of your interest in literature, and especially your use in exploring faith?
Well, I guess from a young age, I've always enjoyed reading, particularly adventure and fantasy stories. I always enjoyed imagining myself in those worlds, and as a child, kind of playing as if I was in there.
Hmm.
And I think that's always stayed with me in to some extent, that deep love for the. I wouldn't call it an escape, because I actually think these stories point to the world as it truly is, but it kind of opens it up. It reveals what's there, the kind of deep magic which we all encounter, but our modern and mundane life has often blinded us to, or has kind of shut us off to.
Hmm.
And so I think that's something I've always been quite enthralled by, and I guess my YouTube channel in part it's a way of trying to explore that and tease that out. I think as well, because these tales they present to us fundamental things in our experience, about ourselves, in a kind of idealized form. So when we read something like Oedipus Rex, for example,
Hmm.
even if we're not Freudians, I think it shows us something very important about the nature of reality, the tragic aspect of life. The Even the noble man like Oedipus can fall, and somebody trying to wrestle with that, the struggle with that. It's it's quite compelling, and it touches on something which goes beyond, beneath the superficial, beneath the surface, and kind of opens that out for us. So I think that's something I really enjoy about literature, and I guess more broadly the arts as well. So things like film and theatre and so on. Um, yeah,
So
I think that would be the main kind of interest there.
that's interesting. It's like it sort of delves down into the human soul, sort of, so to speak.
Yeah, and I should say as well, like not every work of literature does that, right? There's a
Yeah.
lot of mediocre or bad writing. Not every genre does that either. I think fantasy is or mythology is particularly good at it, because um, Tolkien has this wonderful way of putting it. It kind of recovers our sight. We become used to things. We become over familiar with them. We don't recognize their beauty or feel wonder at them anymore. Whereas fantasy, through presenting ordinary things in strange and spectacular ways, reacquaints us with that. So, for example, when we see trees, we might think they're pleasant to look at, but generally we don't think about them as another being with its own life and history and this magnificent tale it has, where some trees have lived 500 years, for example, and have
Yeah.
seen countless kings fall and rise and society change in many ways, and it's still there and it grows and so on. But in The Lord of the Rings, we get living trees. We even get walking trees in the form of the Ents, and they speak, and Tolkien gives them a voice, and we see into the inner life of a tree, you might say. So then, when you read that, you come away having a new appreciation for this gentle giant that we pass by every day. And I think
Hmm.
that's something which that genre uh, is particularly able to um, get at. Then is these sorts of um, essential things in life.
Yeah, for sure. I kind of like that tree that was on the, was it on the Hadrian's Wall there? That
Oh, the one
some,
that was that cut down.
Yeah, yeah. That's too bad, but that tree must have seen some things.
Yeah, I think it was few hundred years old, that tree.
Yeah.
It's certainly been there for quite a while. And I think like so there was quite an outpouring after that happened. Like there was a lot of anger. There were people felt a lot of grief, even
Hmm.
people who had never seen the tree before. And I think in the kind of modern materialist mind, you can't really explain that. It's kind of unnatural. It doesn't make any sense why
It, it
people would feel so strongly about this inanimate object.
it's sort
But
of,
when you recognize it's a life with it and it's
yeah.
bound up with the land and the heritage and the history of the people and place, it becomes something which was a horrible act, a really malicious thing to do. Uh,
Did
so
did they find out who did it?
uh, I do not know. They arrested
Oh,
a boy and a man, but I haven't heard anything for a long time about it. So uh, I don't think there's been any kind of resolution to this yet.
there's something symbolic about that. Like, um, I don't know. I don't want to make it to like a sort of current thing, but the way the Conservative Party, like they're supposed to represent like conservation.
Hmm.
I'm not blaming them for the loss of tree, but there's almost like a um, sort of a narrative poking through, and like they have their symbol, which is like that tree, right?
It's
Sort
a
of,
tree, yeah.
yeah.
Hmm.
And then this tree that's sort of been there, like in a very historical place with a lot of history with it, in a really nice, beautiful spot, and that under their stewardship, uh, this thing happens to get chopped down, and the tree kind of looked a little bit like their one on their logo too. Um,
That's a very good point. Yeah, maybe that should be Labour should put that on their campaign posters. This is what the Conservatives stand for.
or,
Um,
or or even if you just took their conservative logo and then just like left a stump instead of the leaves, like that's sort of like symbolic of what they've done to the UK since they've been in. And I'm not saying Labour's better, but like come on, you know, just
no,
brutal.
I think that's a very powerful image, and it definitely resonated with a lot of people with how things are in this country, and it almost felt like it was the culmination or a, a kind of unleashing of what had been building up for a long time in this country, and marked a kind of shift into an even darker phase, unfortunately. Um,
Oh yeah, so
but
it's super dark.
there is talk of trying to replant the tree there, but again, I don't know what's come of that yet.
Probably end up being a palm tree at this point.
Palm tree.
Uh, so what are your long-term goals with what you do uh, in like the Sensible Center or in your own sphere in regards to like your philosophy and writing career?
I think for me we recognize that there needs to be change in our societies, in our communities. People are suffering. There's a lot that's going wrong, and ultimately, I see my uh, writing, my videos, as in some way trying to contribute to that project. Now, that sounds very lofty and a bit self-righteous, and I'm totally aware that I'm a small, insignificant person in that respect. But I think even if it's just influencing a few people or encouraging a few people, that in itself is a good step forward. I can't change the economy. I can't change the social order tonight, but I can write down ideas that maybe have a trickle on effect or are developed by others or contribute to a conversation which does end up in that place. The
Yeah.
nature of the change, though, is quite important because I
Mm,
think there's a lot of discussion on a political level. okay, if we get these rulers in, that will be okay, or this system, if we change this policy, and so on.
Hmm.
And in a sense, that does need to be discussed. But I think a lot of the problems are um, rooted in much deeper like value commitments that underpin the society.
Yeah.
So you can't. It's almost like we're still playing within the framework that that is wrong, and we might just get the best version of a bad framework. I think of like your NRX guys who want like Peter Thiel and these sorts of people running the show. Yeah, it's going to be more efficient. It's going to be better in some ways, but there's still going to be a predominance on growth. There's still going to be a predominance on kind of valuing things in terms of quantity. There's still going to be kind of materialist understandings of human nature and relationships
Hmm.
dominating society. And to me, you've still not solved the fundamental problems which have produced where we are now. Namely, I think that connection to the sacred and how that influences all the rest of our connections and so on. How exactly that is works out, I'm not sure, and how we
Yeah.
get there, I am not sure. But that's partly what I want. I've been trying to explore and encourage others to explore. Um, is maybe thinking in a more uh, metaphysical way about these things and having a more decisive, different perspective. Maybe in the kind of vogue of Thomas Carlyle, for example.
Mm.
So that's kind of where I'm coming from with what I'm doing.
Well, that's with what you said there. Like you look at a homeless person or a drug addict or a single mother or all these all these social problems, and like
Mm-hmm.
despite living in the most, you could argue it, but one of the wealthiest times in human history, and it's not a material problem really. There's a spiritual problem that brings
Yes.
people to places like that, which is, you can't solve that no matter how much gold you dig up and how many figs you pick. It's just it's got to be solved in another way, and a lot of people have sort of like lost. Maybe too many have so far like lost that sort of frame, as you said.
It's that frame and the community which goes with that.
Yeah.
Because a lot, one of the things that modernity in the form of kind of industrial capitalism has done is it's fragmented, um, communities where mainly individuals are at best kind of small nuclear families who move around and like my own story is an example of this.
Hmm.
I've moved around all of my life. I don't have like um, a community as such which I can call home in a kind of deep sense. I
Hmm.
have my family, but beyond that, I don't have that. And then there isn't like a common life as well with that community. So, um, if you think of your medieval era, there's a common calendar where everybody participates in the feasts and fasts together.
Hmm.
There's a sense of time and place which is shared by everybody, actions done by everybody, um, and we don't have that. But that in part is because on the one hand that's underpinned by a, a, a very rich sense of uh, the universe and why we're here and so on. But on the other, capitalism encourages us to choose our own stories
Yeah.
and pick our a unique combination of what we want. So we're never going to have that kind of common framework. So I think it's those two things which um, have really lead to these problems. And I would add to that as well because you were mentioning kind of maybe the extreme symptoms, but I'd even say like your ordinary person in work, anxiety and depression's through the roof. stress is
Mm.
through the roof. And people will say, well, it's about the nature of the hours and management and wages and so on. But I think even beyond that, it's the nature of the work itself, which is um, often degrading to the human soul and leads people to feel the ways they do. If it was a kind of work which, and this is things which Thomas Carlyle and John Ruskin spoke about quite a lot. If you treat a man like a machine, he's going to feel degraded. But
Yeah.
that's how our economy treats most people. So I'd say even these sorts of things, which we kind of take for granted, that could stay the same. We need a There has to be a massive change if we want to see our communities flourish.
It it- oh man, the it is kind of sad, you know. Like I kind of lament the loss of, because when I grew up, I had some cousins around sometimes, but they're usually older,
Mm,
and I didn't get to spend a lot of time with them. And then like the family sort of fractured since my grandparents passed away. And I can't help to think like in the old days you would have been sort of in the same town, maybe somewhat related to everybody. And so you had these
mm.
like not only familial relationships but like these social relationships with them. And I don't know if maybe it's a problem with, because my family obviously like came from Europe and then came here, and but even when they came here they never really settled anywhere. So like I'm maybe the first generation to like not leave my hometown. Luckily I was able to find like a decent employ in my hometown, but most guys I know that I went to school with, they end up just leaving anyways, like leaving to Alberta or whatever, because that's where the oil
Yeah,
is and you're going to get a job there as a man. Which is, you know, the strange thing is like women don't actually move as much either, because compared to guys, because women can get like a job in nursing or something and they can stay in the town, make pretty decent money.
mm,
But guys usually go out to do trades work, or I mean, some guys get into white collar stuff, but even then they're going to Toronto and stuff, or the U.S. or even Europe. Um, but there's nothing that there's like very little time to settle. It seems like you're always sort of moving to like the next best thing or the next green pasture. And
that's
so
so true.
like for
Hmm.
4 or 5 generations straight, like I looked at my family. I've done my genealogy, so like everybody stayed in the same place basically for like hundreds of years, maybe even 1,000. And because I've gone back like to 380 on some lines, uh, like I've gone back to like the Anglo Saxons before they went over to England, or to, so because it wasn't England at the time. Um, but like
Yes, yeah, mhm.
so like there's some minor movement and stuff, but nowadays it's like there just hasn't been a time to settle. I wonder if there ever will be again. In some case, like have we spiritually changed to no longer do that, or are we gonna eventually settle back down? What do you think?
I mean, that is you've made so many good points there, and I think in a way we're still coming to terms with what industrialization did in this respect. We were mentioning steam trains earlier,
Hmm.
and the the steam train was actually probably one of the most significant inventions in history because for the first time many people could move quickly from one place to another uh, on a daily basis, like
Hmm.
from all uh, kind of classes. And actually, in Britain, the before the steam train, different parts of Britain could have different kind of time zones, you might say,
Hmm.
but it all becomes standardized to work around the train schedule. So we get
Hmm.
a kind of huge shift in how people approach time. It becomes this kind of objective thing, independent of the community. Um, and everybody's working to this accelerated speed in which we can traverse the country and nowadays traverse the world. We can go from like Britain to America in 13 hours, let's say, and that's amazing. That's quite an incredible thing. So our whole world is sped up in a way that our ancestors never could have imagined. and with that comes this dislocation from being rooted somewhere.
Well, yeah,
Uh,
like, back in
because
the day, like if you had to
yeah,
if you had a farm, you couldn't just leave for like X amount of months because you'd have to sow or you'd
hmm
have to take it, take it out, and
and
it's
you
like,
wouldn't
yeah,
be able to. So today you could sell that produce anywhere in the world. So there's Scottish farmers who are selling their peas in Egypt. That you would never think of that. Now, okay, there were big trade networks in the Roman Empire, for example. I'm not trying to diminish that, um, but the extent to which how fast and how much can be moved, never mind people, it's frightening, and our world, like we it takes a long time for civilizations to really come to terms with changes like that.
That
Um, I
that got me
mean,
thinking.
look
That
at
got me thinking actually, because how peas aren't like on their own very valuable, right? You take a lot of them to make any sort of like significant
yeah,
valuation. So trade routes back in the old days would have been like in the Roman times and whatnot would have been mostly valuable goods or rare goods, and
that's right.
and
Yeah.
so it'd be like gold or like silk or maybe wine, depending if you had it in one area or not. And now we're transporting peas. I kind of
Yeah.
wonder what that says, but yeah, sorry, go ahead.
So now, in answer to your question, can we ever go back? I don't think we can ever go back fully unless there was like total collapse, and then future generations have to just embrace living in the kind of post-apocalyptic world, and
Hmm.
new communities will form, and in time traditions form from that. But in a sense, I don't think we should be aiming to go back as a consequence. It would be inauthentic because
Hmm.
we've lived with this world, so we shouldn't try to pretend like we would be pretending if we were trying to just settle down in one place absolutely.
That'd be a
But
LARP,
I
yeah.
think it would be LARPing, and it wouldn't have any kind of real spirit to it. It has to come from us organically. And in a way, that's what I think many of us are trying to wrestle with is okay, we feel this thing is lost, but we are also children of this age. But how do we kind of marry the two things together in a way that's sincere and thus has a kind of solid foundation to build on? I think there is something there that could be possible. Maybe it's not necessarily being located in one place, but the forging of a strong sense of community. And that might be a more mobile thing than it has been in the past. But having a those kind of deep connections, which are tied in with maybe certain ritual actions or a framework for understanding the world, if you can build that kind of thing, that might be enough for a lot of us, and a good step forward.
Yeah, and maybe more concentrated on like sort of feeling rather than measuring in some way, because I
Mm,
think we do spend a lot of time sort of like being quantitative about everything, and not that we can escape that, but it sort of feels like it's everything now.
that's true. That's true. We need to escape the reign of quantity. Uh, I guess maybe the only other alternative is, and I know some folks have suggested this, is maybe moving to another country where if you can find people of a like mind and have your own property and so on, perhaps then you can build a kind of grounded community,
Like a
one that isn't
colony.
going to be yeah, a colony like in Paraguay, right?
Yeah, something like
That's
that. Yeah,
that's the one people have been suggesting.
that sounds
So
familiar. Yeah,
I wonder, right? Um,
yeah,
so yeah, so I mean, like that might be one way of doing it. But of course, again, it is different because you're having to enter into it with strangers. You're not coming from it with an already established heritage and tradition and so on for that collective. So it is a bit of a different dynamic. But
Mm.
if it's built and it continues and people stay, that's when you start to see those things form uh, amongst that community. So I could imagine that might be one way of really going for it if that's what you were looking for.
Yeah, that would do that. It's an interesting idea. It's tough to pull off though with the way things are. Um, and like how much can you like can you trust these sort of like distant strangers? I think strangely you sort of can, but it's still quite a question, right? You're sort of going all in,
Mm.
and if you fail, well, now you're just in a third world country.
Yeah, yeah.
Oops.
Although staying in Britain might be a third world country in a few years' time. I mean, the state of the services is pretty poor. Um,
True.
but I
There's no
think
risk-free solution.
no, there isn't. The other thing though I'd say as well is so you can maybe trust these strangers because they too have made the same commitment as you. But what really matters is what the children do
Yeah. Yeah.
because they are the ones that can choose to continue this or not. And the reason why I say that is I look at like my grandparents' generation. My grandparents have lived in the same village all of their life. They've
Yeah.
lived in their house for 50 years. They have never moved from this town. I mean, they see the next town over as like foreign territory. Like this is this is the sum of the world for them. And their generation by and large stayed there. I think some cousins went to Australia
Mm.
as part of kind of a lot of Scottish families moved there. They were kind of invited over by the government, and there were various kind of Scottish businesses that were looking for folks. But
Mm.
generally, they stayed in that town. But the children of that generation, so my father's generation, they all most of them left. They went to university or they got kind of white collar jobs and so on. And they went to various different places, in part because their parents supported them and really wanted them to have a better life than their own.
Mm.
But because all the children left, those towns now, uh, that kind of continuity is largely going. And it's mainly folks coming into the town now who are going to continue it. So that would also be the same, I think, with the Paraguay situation. If you have a lot of families going over there, if the children all decide, oh, we want to go back to America or to the UK, then you don't build that traditional community beyond, one generation. It requires people staying of their own volition because they feel that's their home
Mm.
for it to really develop into something which counters um, what most of us are facing.
Yeah, because I guess back in the old days, it would just be too hard to leave, right? In a lot of cases, and nowadays it's so easy to.
Yeah, that's true.
So
That's
that
true.
makes.
It's you've got
Sorry.
a lot of
Yeah.
incentives to go as well.
Yeah.
A lot of social pressure to leave, I think, too. Um, you see the amount of flack even like stay-at-home mothers get uh, from the system, from
Yeah.
the media, and so on. So can you imagine that? And you see that with uh, like religious groups as well. So there'll be a lot of attack on like the Amish, for example. I know you were talking about that last week,
Yeah.
or the Bruderhof communities. It's like, oh, you shouldn't stay. It's a cult. You need to go out and explore the world and so on. And if you don't, that you're a bit weird. You're a bit crazy. You've got
Yeah.
to have a lot of strength to say no. I'm going to stay here.
Well,
Um,
even on that motherhood thing, it's so cynical too because the like of all the precious things in the world, right, to attack motherhood, and then also
mm,
I kind of see like like all the childcare question. Like they keep on the people are pushing for free childcare or whatever, and they think, oh, that'll get women in the workforce. It's true, but it also monetizes motherhood because
yeah.
now now you tax the mother and then you tax the workers that mother the children poorly. Um, I just don't see what the benefit is. Like, okay, so the woman gets to continue her career at the cost of like the entire next generation.
Sounds like a
Just
good trade.
yeah, it's like really short term thinking. All this stuff is so short term thinking. It just it's almost like no one's at the helm. No one with any, maybe they're quantitatively at the helm, but qualitatively they're not. And there's no sort of like, I don't want to say blood spirit, but there's no like spirit for like the next that comes. It's always like even there's even like things you can get here like tax things where you put money into a savings account for a kid's education, and then the
Mm.
government will like double it or whatever, and but you have to do it for like 10 years. But even that, it's sort of like, yeah, save all this money so you can kick your kid out of your house and so you can go live in New York City, or whatever, or go live in
Yeah.
Toronto and become a soulless white collar apparatchik. So everything pressures towards that, like uh, destruction of humanity in some sense, the natural social humanity.
You've put that so well, and I definitely see that kind of presentism. I mean, the leaders are incentivized to that in two ways. I think your democratic politicians, they only care about winning the next election and staying in power for their term. But after their term, they're no longer in charge. So, do they have any incentive to invest in the country beyond their term? They want things that can have quick term results to win the next election, I guess.
And that gets, and
But
it seems to get
then,
shorter and shorter every like election cycle, you know.
well, I mean, Conservative Party leaders go every year at the moment, so it'll be a 6 month turnover. Can we get a bridge built in 6 months? But then the irony is, of course, they can't get anything done in a short amount of time.
Yeah,
But then the other side of it is like this. So we have like a managerial, um, public and private system where managers are running things. People who don't own the things that they're running, people who are running things according to kind of abstract rules.
yeah.
Like they are replaceable. The rules are the thing which are supposed to govern the system. So they too don't really have a personal investment in the running of things. They are mere administrators who could be replaced by another administrator.
Well,
So
in that sense, it's sort of like the rules become the king rather than the
mhm,
king being a human being. They're just like soulless words put on the paper.
exactly, and I do think this is the strongest part of like the NRX proposal is like if you have people like Elon Musk, for example, say he owns America. Let's just say he owned America, right?
Yeah,
Um, he would have a personal investment in seeing it go well for a long time, and that's basically what a monarch had. A good, not every monarch was good, but by and large, they had an interest in seeing the nation flourish over many years because they want to stay in charge for many years.
yeah.
Uh, so I think it's our modern political system facilitates short-term thinking and thinking which is detrimental to the growth of and sustaining a civilization.
We're sort of at like the democratic stage of like the year of the four emperors, at least in the UK.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
and I don't see that getting any. That could happen here in Canada too. Like we're in a minority government as well. Or I guess you're not, but we're in a minority government. It's almost like the Conservatives are in a minority government because they don't get anything done. Um, and even though they have a policy, they don't do what they're supposed to do. And it's almost like some like socialist is holding a knife to their throat. But which is actually literally happening here. But yeah, so yeah, it's crazy. Like, yeah, what do you've had what Truss? Well, you had Boris. So Truss, no, who was it before? May,
So there was
Boris, Truss, and then Sunak, right?
Sunak, yeah. To be fair,
Yeah,
May was a few years ago, like
yeah,
2018, I think. But
and she was
um,
relatively stable compared to well, I guess not really, because who was before her? Boris? I can't remember.
Cameron, it was
Cameron.
Cameron. So
Oh
he
wow, okay.
he he. he left after the referendum on Brexit,
Yeah.
and then May took over. But she had a majority, but went to an election and managed to lose seats, and so ended up um, not a minority government, but just about. And this was key because during the Brexit negotiations, half of the Tories were Remainers, right?
Hmm.
So every time she tried to bring a deal to Parliament, they would rebel, so she couldn't get anything done
Yeah.
on Brexit. So that's how Boris came about, and he won a massive majority, and then somehow the Tories, from one of the biggest majorities ever in British history, they're looking at the prospect of being largely wiped out. It's quite
Yeah. Zero
it's amazing.
seats. Uh,
Zero
I'm gonna
seats.
make it. I'm gonna make a meme that we talked about earlier with that tree, and then I'm gonna put zero seats on the bottom. So,
Oh, please do. That'd be
yeah,
glorious.
that's what I have in my mind right now, or for later. Um, so I got some more questions for you. This is more like a hypothetical, I suppose, but if money was no object for you, like say you had some sort of a pension to like keep yourself going, what would you do with your time?
Oh, that's a great question.
Like you're not a millionaire, but you're comfortable. You can raise a
Hmm.
family. What would you do if you could do whatever you wanted? Well, I suppose that
Hmm.
could mean you're a millionaire nowadays, but
Well, I mean, so my initial inclination was to say I'd really double down on the writing, like writing a book. I have plans for a couple of books, um, but I just haven't had time to get round to them. But I was maybe thinking a bit more broadly, and I think actually I would really try to cultivate a forum where a number of people who are interested in the same kind of issues I am about mythology and the fundamental underlying values of our societies could come together and really work together, like a retreat or something, like in
hmm
the a nice buy a castle, in the wilderness, and have like a center where we can all come and just work together, trying to develop kind of imaginative ways forward. Um,
hmm
I think that's what I would do. Uh, I think I'm going to need a bit more than a nice pension, though. I think for that idea.
that's true, but it might be a start. That's pretty cool. Pretty cool idea. So
Well,
what?
because I think as well, one of the things that we're missing at the moment is like physical space. That's something that we need to start developing because we have all this great stuff online. We have a few conferences each year, and uh, I think I speak for many when I say they're wonderful occasions and super energizing, and you kind of feel like, yeah, we can do something, but then we all go back again, and then it's a year later we meet up. And I think having a physical space where you can, over a period of time, do stuff together, uh, that can kind of augment what's already there. Take some of that spirit, which is comes from these conferences and events, and turn it into like take it to the next step, I guess. So yeah, I can see that. That's what I would do with my money. I just need Peter Thiel to fund me.
Yeah, we should work on that. We got to work on the funding, and then then you're good, right? Yeah.
Yes, yes.
So further to that, like, what is your philosophy on life, and where do you think our world is headed? This is sort of like the last big question, but what do you think of that?
Hmm. Well, I'll start with where the world's headed. Uh, I think my view is that we are going to hit. We're going to keep in a state of decline. It's going to keep getting worse, and at some point, and I'm specifically talking about the UK. At some point, the many of the services we take for granted are just not going to be able to function anymore
Hmm
because the people within it won't be competent enough to sustain the things which require that level of technical ability, but also the will to do it will just have disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
And when we reach that point, you're going to, that's a breakdown of the government basically. And so you will start to see the formation of maybe more local or regional power centers as kind of competition over resources will increase.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be quite a fluid situation because so much of our stuff is globalized now in terms of our networks of energy. So like Britain's energy comes from France primarily. It's all French energy providers. There
Mm-hmm.
are energy sources in the UK, but they keep shutting down like nuclear power plants and coal power plants and so on without replacing them adequately. So a lot of our energy comes from abroad. But what happens when we don't have the people who are able to run that effectively? Well, we're going to have to be competing over things a lot more.
Yeah.
So, and maybe you'll see people start to open up coal mines off their own back and things like that. So I can see I can see quite a destabilizing period on the current trajectory. I think the only exceptions to that are if we do see a major cultural and political transformation in the ways I've been suggesting we need to be exploring,
Mm-hmm.
or if we have a more automated society, um, one that fully embraces the kind of techno futurist approach, which I think would still have massive problems, uh, in terms of the values it would be built on, but it could keep the current system going. It wouldn't be the current system; it'd be a more efficient version, but it could keep the services going in a way that isn't possible on with just using human capital. So that's kind of where I see things heading. Time scale wise, I'm not. I couldn't say. Um,
Yeah.
but but I do see that on the horizon. So quite a dramatic view, I guess, of what's in store for the UK.
Yeah, it's funny because like it runs parallel with like a lot of people in our sphere, obviously. Um, but it makes you wonder like what goes through for lack of a better term, like a normie or a non-involved person. Wonder what they what, if for them is
Mm.
it sort of like they're just running up against a brick wall soon, or are they just like surprised continuously, or perhaps they're just sort of like a I don't know like a pastoral animal just sort of going along with whatever wherever they get led. I find that seems to be mostly the case, but
I think it's a mixture of all three. A lot of that I've come into contact now are running up against a brick wall when they, things the government used to provide, they're not doing,
mm-hmm,
and they try and get help. They try and say that you're in charge of this, why are you not helping? And nothing happens. I'll give you an example. In London, and in a lot of places in the UK, but particularly London, I think theft is like really high at the moment.
mm-hmm,
Gangs will just kind of walk into shops, raid them, and leave on a daily basis. The same shops, both kind of big stores and small businesses, and many of these businesses have given up phoning the police because most of the time the police won't show up.
mm-hmm.
They don't turn up for theft anymore. So you've got this situation where the police, they'll arrest you if you do anything to protect your store. By and large, if you beat up one of these thieves, you're going to jail.
Mm-hmm.
But they themselves won't protect your store anymore. So what's that going to do to the small businesses? Well, they're all
What's
going to shut down
what's that to
because
say? What's that even saying to them other than like shut down though too, right? It's like the state doesn't care about you; they're going to crush you
yeah,
in like
yeah.
two different directions.
So so you that's an extreme example. Um, maybe a more kind of mundane example is like uh, so in certain cities the bins are not being emptied as they should be by the local council.
Hmm.
So somebody will complain about it and they'll say, "Oh, we didn't empty it because the bins are too full." Well, the bins are too full because you didn't empty it the last time.
That's
So
brutal.
you just get this cycle where they never empty the bins. And it sounds kind of mundane, but of course that's how you get vermin. It's also untidy. It creates a bad place to live. It encourages kind of antisocial behavior. Whereas a tidy street, a tidy garden, you don't get those problems. Uh,
Yeah.
but it's also very isolating because the person who's writing in saying, you should be helping, well, then they're told, they just get a nonsense reply like that and they feel helpless. So I do think there is a, a growing awareness of it, but I'm not
Hmm.
sure if people are fully comprehending that it could get a lot worse. There's still this assumption like the government is going to be there to help us out, and we just need to fix the government.
Yeah.
Um, but I think for those, I think in our fear, a lot of people have seen in history like things can change a lot more um, rapidly than we take for granted. I always think of like the decline of the Roman Empire in Britain. It only took a few decades, and cities were abandoned, for example,
Yeah.
after the Romans left. It was the pottery industry just collapsed. Money kind of disappeared. It was a pretty serious thing.
Well, basically anything
And
you can't rely on anymore just has to go immediately, right?
yes,
So
hmm
like for example, in Canada, like we have healthcare, it's publicly funded. There's some small private stuff. So it's sort of like the UK, I guess. Um, but you can. I'm talking to Canadians in my sphere or in our sphere, and we can kind of see like the skeleton of the private system sort of growing to fill in the parts where the government's no longer like covering like certain care because certain healthcare you can't neglect. So if the government neglects it, that hole is just going to get filled because otherwise the society people just start dying for no reason. So you can already see that happening, and I think eventually will happen. It won't be like the healthcare system's over, the public one. It'll sort of convert to
hmm
a Brazil model where if you're poor, you can go to the free one and it sucks. But if you have any money at all, like you get the private care because there's less wait. You're not waiting 6 months for a hip replacement. In Canada, some people wait like years for hip replacements already.
yeah, it's the
Like,
same here. Yeah,
yeah, like to the point where I'm like, hey, mom, or not my mom, but she doesn't need a hip replacement. But for example, if it was my mom, it would be cheaper to like ship her off to Mexico, get it done, have her recover there in a nice resort, on the beach or something,
mm.
and then fly back up. It would literally be cheaper. Um, well, definitely cheaper than the United
Paraguay
States.
Paraguay's looking a little bit better as well
Yeah,
on that
yeah,
front.
they have nice healthcare out there. Actually, it's like here actually for a while in Canada you couldn't see a doctor. Like a lot of people don't have
Mm.
family doctors anymore. Like they just fell off the rolls. And
Yeah.
for instance, I have a family doctor. My one daughter has a family doctor, but my other two kids don't. And it's because my other two kids were on
Mm.
my ex-wife's doctor, but then she retired. And so I've tried to get my kids on my doctor, but they just won't accept anybody else. So I have this
Yeah.
weird situation where if it's my kid, I go to my kid's eye doctor for there's little tricks you can do. So I go to my kid's eye doctor because they're an optometrist, and
Mm.
uh, they can give you prescriptions for basic things, um, but they're private. But it's sort of paid for by the government. So you can kind of like if you're an adult, you have to pay for it yourself. But if it's a kid, they're covered for vision. So I can use these little tricks to get things done. But you can only do that so long before like the whole thing starts to collapse essentially.
Yeah.
It,
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Could
crazy.
you see like a black market of healthcare emerging?
Oh, there already is um, for basic stuff. Like sometimes you just need antibiotics, and that's just
Yeah.
the end of it. But in terms of like physical health and stuff like that, that's all. There's some you can obviously go to like a physiotherapist or whatever, or a massage therapist, but a lot of things now just happen I don't want to say in back alleys because they're not dirty, but behind in the gray areas essentially, behind closed
Yeah.
doors, like away from prying eyes and officialdom, which I think is actually kind of a good thing. I remember Stephen Carson, Radical Liberation. I remember he said once, this is years ago when I was younger, that the holes in the system are the places where oxygen gets in,
Mm.
and so little gray areas like this actually kind of help keep things alive a little bit longer. uh,
Well, that's true, and I mean that. I mean, if you were looking at like my kind of catastrophe model, that might be one way things are established, which then grow. If there was a collapse in services, if there's already groups who are supplying resources outside of the law, when it collapses, they would naturally kind of fill the vacuum. You would imagine.
yeah, exactly.
So you could see that kind of thing flourishing in that situation.
Hmm. Well, I'm all out of major questions for now, but if you do, you have anything you want to, anything else you want to say? I know you have your Arthurian project coming up.
Yeah, towards the end of May, I will be hosting King Arthur Day. It's following on from last year. I did Wagner Day, and with Apostolic Majesty, I did Tolkien Day, and it's going to be a number of people from across the sphere are coming together to produce live streams and videos and original works of art and so on to kind of explore and celebrate the traditions and legends surrounding King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. We're going to
Hmm.
be looking at whether there was a historical Arthur, the development of the legend through time, the ways different kings used the legend of King Arthur, Arthur in art, such as with the Pre Raphaelite Brotherhood, Arthur in music, such as in the operas of Wagner or Rick Wakeman's 1970s albums. We'll even look at Arthur in film. And
Hmm.
more broadly, it's a chance to kind of really get to grips with why has this story stayed not just in Britain, but I'd say in certainly in the Anglo world and in Europe more broadly. Why is it for over 1500 years been so important? What is it which has compelled people from across Christendom to retell this story in fresh ways for their own day? And in so doing, we might discover something of that spirit and new ways to articulate it for our own time. So, yes, that will be towards the end of May. If anybody listening to this wants to take part, they're more than welcome to send me a DM and we can talk about it. But yeah, that's all I have to promote.
And you're is it at Nathan CJ Hood on Twitter.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I'll put that in the comments once this is up. I'm a skeletal streamer, so but I'll get that up as soon as I can. I've already put a link to your YouTube channel for the Arthur Day video.
Oh,
So
thank you.
if people want to check that out, I'll put it again in the comments once the was it called HUD or whatever the recording goes up.
Mm,
After the live stream, I'll put
yeah.
that in as well, so people can access that. And yeah, as I've known Nathan online for a number of years now. He's a great guy. So make sure you check him out. He does great things. He's very qualitative, and yeah, he's a great man of the sphere. So, anyways, thanks for listening, and we're going to end the stream.